Good morning, wrestling friends, followers, and family. I am Christian here back with another episode of the Duality of Wrestling podcast. Thank you so much for joining me because we have a lot to talk about based on what went down at AEW's Beach Break 2026 last night. We had a lot of momentous things happen. There's a lot of wheels in motion that are quickly moving us in the direction of the next pay per view, AEW Redemption. So let's talk about it, guys. There have been some really, really big things that have gone down in the last, 12 hours? I'm recording this just before 8 a.m. Thursday morning. I actually did something relatively rare for me as far as my AEW watch habits. The second the live show itself ended, I actually stayed up last night to watch all of Beach Break before I went to bed because I was really excited for this show. There was obviously the giant Kenny Omega versus Maxwell Jacob Friedman world title match. There was the super fun brawl we were going to get between Tommaso Ciampa and Chris Jericho. We have the ring work specialty delight that was and is always Kyle Fletcher versus Konosuke Takeshita for the International Championship. And then the what I would have loved to see be a bit more unpredictable women's casino gauntlet match for a redemption title shot. So, and then there were, a few other things that took place that are giving us some build that is, very interesting, especially where some of your world title adjacent contenders are concerned. So let's get into it. So we opened with a backstage promo with Kenny Omega being interviewed by Renee Paquette. Um, was there with Michael Nakazawa. He acknowledged the Bucks weren't there this evening, and mostly this was just a career retrospective sort of promo talking about his time in the Indies, in PWG, in DDT, obviously in New Japan. He sort of looked at himself very holistically here. We'll be the first to say Kenny is not always, on the money with his promos, or at the very least, his promo style doesn't always fit what I look for in a pro wrestling promo. But he worked really well here. He was very raw. He was very open. He seemed vulnerable. This was a really, really good promo by Kenny Omega leading up to the gravity of this world championship match at the end of the evening. That led us sort of into our first establishing shots of the venue itself. I loved the vibe of this show. The feel of the way it was designed. You had the lifeguard towers, the Adirondack chairs, the sand all around, the fact that it's an outdoor venue in a warm weather state like Florida in St. Pete Clearwater. It really gave big vibes of vintage Bash at the Beach meets Road Wild in the best possible way. You even had Justin Roberts dressed in upscale beach gear. You had the ring cameramen were all dressed in like board shorts. I thought it was a really nice commitment to the theme of the show without like beating you over the head in, let's say, like a WrestleMania 9 way, for example. So love how thematically consistent AEW was here, and it just gave for a really good feel and a different vibe for the event, which I really appreciated. So we opened the show with, from an in-ring standpoint, with Tommaso Ciampa versus Chris Jericho. Ciampa took this one home with what I wrote down as the sandy knee. We'll get to that. Ciampa started off with coming out, messing around with some of the entranceway stuff, and then he tried to hide at the side of the entrance ramp to ambush Chris Jericho. Jericho, for his own credit, came through the crowd, met him on the ramp, and they started their brawl. And that's really what this was. Just a nice, fun brawl for all of us. That's what most of their feud has been. And that continued and built throughout this match. We had a really cool suplex all in the entranceway area to Jericho from Ciampa, where he put Ciampa through an Adirondack chair. Obviously a pretty cool visual. And again, adding to the incorporation of the Beach Break theme, which was just great. You had a vicious fairy tale ending spot from Ciampa to Jericho on the ring steps that gave us some color for Jericho in this match, which was great. Ciampa eventually grabbed a bucket of sand and tried to use that in the face of Jericho, but he countered with a code breaker. Very smooth. These guys had really great cohesion and chemistry throughout the match, and that was kind of a running theme throughout the evening. Everybody that was really on this show had fantastic chemistry with each other. Nothing was really choppy, very few, if any, botches that I noticed. So, just overall, great work by everybody on Beach Break, making the show look as great as possible. Um, Champa used the sand to get out of a lion tamer, and that led to Champa connecting with a third running knee, this time with the pad down, and that was what scored him the win. So when I called it the sandy knee, it was the toss of the sand into Jericho's face, and then the running knee for the third time with the pad down that allowed Champa to get a clean-ish win in this match. Following the match, Ciampa laid out Jericho with a chair. We actually got a full head chair shot to Jericho. He did get his hands up to protect his head, which we can all appreciate given the severity of concussions. Nobody wants to see people concussed, certainly not even MAGA Jericho. But you don't see, full on head chair shots very often anymore. So I thought it was worth calling out that we did get that from Ciampa here. Ciampa actually closed out the post match segment by rooting through a toolbox he had pulled out from underneath the ring and then finding a power drill, which, calls back to a week or so ago when they were doing their backstage and loading dock brawl where they grabbed one of those. Then Ciampa grabbed it, tried to use it, was pulled apart by security. Ciampa ends up grabbing like a pool float and doing the power drill to that and having the float spin around while punctured on the drill. That, again, another fun visual. They played it up as, oh my god, Ciampa's the psycho killer. This is, heinous. This is, way out of the bounds of what we should expect from a wrestling match. And I agree. Having a character like a Ciampa who routinely will go above and beyond what is called for, sort of in the same way a Swerve does, is really great to have on your program, and especially a way to balance out a more, let's call it, sports entertaining character like a Jericho. It's a really good, juxtaposition. I liked it. That takes us back to a vignette for the Brawling Birds. Clearly, Jamie Hayter is back healthy enough that we can be pushing them more as a tag team. And they were just sort of shown in a bar-ish setting that was clearly not a bar, but who cares? Beating up men for some reason. And just be like, oh, it's good to be doing that again. And that moved on. And to me, that's a very clear signal that the Brawling Birds are going to be a focal point of the women's tag team division again. I renew my thought process that they're going to be the team that is pushed to dethrone the Divine Dominion, probably at All In, to win the AEW Women's World Tag Team Championships, and I am fine with that. I love the Divine Dominion, but I think a hometown win for the Brawling Birds would make sense there. That brings us to a Renee Paquette outdoor interview with Will Ospreay, giving his thoughts on the last chance match Kenny and MJF are having this evening. Just throwing support for Kenny, but MJF quickly interrupts, taking issue with everyone seeming wanting Kenny versus Will at Wembley. Will fires back, saying he being MJF, doesn't crack the top 50 of best in the world despite MJF's claims, and doesn't even enter the conversation because of the way he conducts himself and his in-ring antics and what have you. MJF responds by spitting in Will's face, which leads us to a brief brawl with pull apart by security. And then, as he's parting, MJF says, Kenny's a dead man and it's on you, Ospreay, for that being the case. Great segment. It really helped build the tension and it gave us an air of unpredictability. It made us not feel like it was destined for Kenny to win the main event because they're still furthering a potential Ospreay versus MJF main event at Wembley. That was the focal point of their discussion. So it really muddied the water in terms of not letting the audience know who was going to emerge from the main event victorious. And AEW has been really, really good at that throughout the booking of the world title scene this year in general. So my hat is off to AEW for how they have specifically handled their men's main event scene. Very unpredictable, very natural, very fluid, involving so many contenders. I love everything that they've done with that aspect of the show. Moving on, we had our title match opener for the evening, first of two, which is Kyle Fletcher challenging Konosuke Takeshita for the AEW International Championship. I mentioned, excuse me, I mentioned in the preview episode that I was incredibly excited for this match, and it delivered on everything I was looking for. Um, Fletcher came out with a pink version of Takesta's mask, another awesome little small touch. Another thing AEW's been great is a lot of these small touches have been really ways to elevate feuds just beyond I don't like you or I want your title. They've been like being able to throw some of these subtle digs from the competitors at each other, which is a really great way to show that the feud is escalating and more personal. Really like that. The commentary notes that Kyle Fletcher has never beaten Takeshita one on one. It could be foreshadowing, but I do think it's a really nice thing to note because I even wasn't aware that that was the case, and it adds more depth to their feud. So great work on commentary there. We had some a vicious PK by Fletcher, soon followed by a tombstone and wheelbarrow suplex combo by Takeshita on the apron. Really, really brutal looking. Commentary sold it like death. Don Callis specifically made it look vicious. And I loved that the commentary team also mentioned right around that time that Takeshita had allegedly written his graduate thesis on the German suplex. I have no idea whether that's true, but I think it's a really, really fun wrinkle. And as somebody who has written a graduate thesis to get his master's degree in his life, that is a really nice piece of nuance added to Takeshita's character that I didn't know, that just sort of shows his commitment to the wrestling game and lore and history. I love that. So another way to sort of solidify Takeshita as a great babyface is an odd way of his incorporation of wrestling history. So I love that. That moves us on towards, moving in the conclusion of the match. There's just so much to talk about here. There's the poison Rana from Takeshita that sort of barely the hit, but then Fletcher immediately responded with a Michinoku driver as Takeshita was running in for probably a power drive knee, which was a really fluid and great sequence. I almost forget how badass looking a move the Michinoku driver is. It's exceptional. Um, Love that was busted out. That should be more prevalent in wrestling for how good and influential, frankly, Taka Michinoku was for his time. Um, Fletcher hit a PK to the arm into a sheer drop brainbuster, but nope. Takeshita kicked out in a great false finish because they'd been playing up the injury to the arm from a ring post shot that Takeshita had done earlier on. Just such an excellent match overall. Fletcher, especially that running boot and kick he does in the corner, really is something to behold. And I think there's something too about Kyle Fletcher being so vocal and, for lack of a better term, screamy in his matches, really adds to the perception of Fletcher's intensity in every one of his contests. So I really enjoy that about him. We got to the finish, which was a brainbuster on the buckles to end the match cleanly and give us a new AEW International Champion in Kyle Fletcher. I was surprised by this, but mainly because I did not expect them to take the belt off of Takeshita so soon, as I mentioned in the preview, and just put it immediately back in the Don Callis family. And one thing I noted from the post show or the post match segment was you have now three singles champions after this match residing within the Don Callis family. I think that's too much of a consolidation of power for one stable, even one as large as the DCF. I'd like to see there be a little bit more diversity in the way the titles are spread out amongst the roster. But if you are making the DCF a main focal point of your show right now, it makes a little bit of sense to give them more than one championship, but I think three is a bit excessive. And I do think it's a shame for Takeshita to have been chasing Okada's international championship for so long, to win it at Double or Nothing, and to all relatively soon after drop it to Kyle Fletcher. It's a little disappointing, but like most people, I believe they're building to a three-way match between all three of those men at All In. for that international championship, and that's going to be fantastic. So if they get there, great. Would love to see it. Post match, the Don Callis family comes down and celebrates with Kyle Fletcher, while the conglomeration comes down to sort of help Takeshita up and show support. That brings us after the commercial break with Mick Foley coming out and stopping Don Callis having something important to say. And he sort of put over Kyle Fletcher. As a fantastic young talent, and obviously the match itself is being really, really good, which it most certainly was. Match quality that could easily main event a traditional Dynamite, but this didn't even get us to the close to the main event with how great of a show this Dynamite Beach Break was. Fletcher states he was never Takeshita's friend, and he was always riding Fletty's coattails. Callis and Foley obviously have some tension there, and that leads to Callis inviting Kevin Knight to ringside to show off them having 3 titles. Knight starts trash talking Kyle Fletcher as he makes his way down the ramp, saying, it took you long enough to win this back and, beat Takeshita, which I like that they're, furthering that aspect of tension. I think it's with a stable as big as the Don Callis family, having tension between some of those members is a very strong thing and can lead to a really good face turn. We saw that with Takeshita. I would assume we will eventually see it with Kyle Fletcher as well, because Knight recently turned heel. He's not going to turn back face again so soon. I think this is just planting seeds eventually for the long-awaited Kyle Fletcher face turn, which I think we're all going to be here for. Looking forward to it. Andrade interrupts, states that since Knight reminded us all that he's still a world title shot recipient, and he's owed that for being involved in the Death's Door cage match at Forbidden Door. Andrade stated that since the Don Callis family never got him the world title that was promised him as a member of the Don Callis family, now that he is not, he is coming to take a title away from the Don Callis family. I like that. It keeps Andrade showing that he's still focused on the world championship, but this is a detour for him that's personal, that makes sense for his character. Really well done, again, creatively. Callis says if Andrade can beat Jake Doyle on Dynamite next week, he can earn a spot, quote, in the meat grinder against Mark Davis for Mark Davis's national championship. That's going to be great. Mark Davis has not missed at all pretty much this entire year, was rightfully rewarded with a singles championship, his first one in AEW, and seeing a match between him and Andrade is really going to be a great contest. Looking forward to it, and I could really see that going either way, with the specter of Don Callis family interference possibly playing a role there. I think that'll be the match at Redemption. I think we're going to get Andrade versus Davis at Redemption. I could see Andrade taking the title off of him there, and I think it would actually even make sense to do so. So that would be where I think they'll go. But overall, this was a fun segment. Andrade at the end of it sort of invites the Don Callis family to run him off the stage, where there is a Darby Allin lying in wait with a book bag and a skateboard, waiting to ambush specifically Kevin Knight. Tables quickly turn. Darby is beat down. It's Brian Cage who picks up the skateboard after Kevin Knight talks him out of, opening the book bag based on the spot at Death's Door where Knight got a booby-trapped backpack that had him fall off the cage through some tables. Knight is clearly character scarred from that, and so he was trying to warn Cage about using that. Cage picks up the skateboard instead. That's booby-trapped as well, and that blows up in Brian Cage's face. The camera points to Doyle blaming Andrade for this, and then the camera cuts over to Andrade holding a cartoonish size detonator switch thrower that we're assuming is linked to the skateboard. And in a great way to incorporate the new Andrade catchphrase / question, while holding it, Andrade looks at him and goes, "How you know?" And it's just, oh my God, what they've done with this face turn with Andrade and still making him true to who he is, but, really, engaging the audience as a baby face, and just really being a really fun character to watch. It's been a revelation. And it's just, again, I go back to, we saw how Andrade was booked when he was elsewhere in his last run, not specifically well thought of, not specifically cared for from a narrative standpoint. Then, having him come back, be booked immediately very well in a program with a Kenny Omega, aligned in a top faction, Don Callis, booked as a top talent in the Don Callis family. Um, so happy for Andrade that this is going this well. I was in attendance live back when he tore the house down with Johnny Gargano in NXT Philadelphia 2018 at their takeover, which is widely regarded as one of NXT's best matches ever. Um, I unfortunately had to miss the first like 5 or 10 minutes of it because I was locked in the bathroom with stomach issues, but which is not pleasant to do at the Wells Fargo Center in Philadelphia. But when I came back, I got to witness one of the all-time NXT classic matches. Overall, great show. I could not be happier for Andrade that he is having the success that he's having, especially with some of the challenge he has had both personally and professionally. Hey, friends, just a quick housekeeping note that my review of Beach Break went a little bit longer than I expected. So this is going to be a two-parter. So I'm going to, break this up here and, stick with me for part two that I'll get uploaded as soon as possible. But yeah, stick around for part two. This was part one. We'll get that up for you very shortly. Thanks a lot, guys.